My husband surprised me one day by saying he wanted to use the $1 million I inherited to renovate our family home. He said with a grin. I was stunned, barely able to speak. My father had passed away, leaving me the inheritance, but I hadn't told my husband about it. I'd been considering divorcing him because he was too controlling, and I didn't want him knowing about the money since he was always greedy for it. But how did he find out? When I asked him, he confessed to threatening my mother to spill the secret. I couldn't believe his audacity. I fumed as I'd argued with my husband, but he just smirked and said, "Doesn't matter what you think. The deal's done. Your yelling won't change a thing." Now, I'm Caroline, 28 years old, working at a big bank. Always wanted to tie the knot, but my busy job didn't leave much time for dating. So I took a chance and signed up with a matchmaking agency. That's where I met Robert, a cheerful delivery driver a year older than me. In my line of work, I hardly meet any women. Meeting someone like you, Caroline, is like hitting the jackpot, Robert said, blushing. I feel the same way. It's wonderful to hear you say that, I replied. Would you go out with me? With marriage in mind, Robert popped the question. I said yes, and our love story began smoothly. We tied the knot 3 years back. At first, I thought we were a loving pair. I made more money than Robert, but he always praised me, saying, Caroline, you're amazing, such a career woman. But 3 years into our marriage, Robert's attitude changed. He started with sarcastic jabs like, must be nice, earning that big salary. And it wasn't just him. My once friendly in-laws turned cold. They used to be so sweet. Caroline, working at a major bank is impressive. You must have worked hard. We're thrilled our son married you, they'd say. Thanks. I'm lucky to have Robert, I'd reply. We're looking forward to having a great relationship with you, my mother-in-law would say, with a warm smile. At first, both my in-laws seemed so supportive, looking at us with loving eyes. Though issues with mothers-in-law are often talked about, I never thought it would concern me. But soon enough, their true colors showed. Caroline, you make good money, right? Give us some. I want a designer bag. It's not a big deal to help us out once in a while, my mother-in-law demanded, as if it were expected. But I just got you a dress for your birthday recently, and I don't lend or borrow money, even within family, I replied. They were furious when I refused. How dare you? We only agreed to this marriage because you work at a big bank. Truth is, we can't stand you. Sick of you always speaking your mind so clearly, my mother-in-law shouted. Exactly. What's the point of a daughter-in-law who won't give us money? Giving gifts for birthdays is expected. We're telling you to hand over cash. Even after we've asked so many times, you still won't give in. You're the worst daughter-in-law, my father-in-law scolded, backing up his wife. Robert simply nodded along with his parents' harsh words and didn't stand up for me. To add to that, he often splurged on takeout and expensive furniture without consulting me, saying, you make good money, so this should be fine. It wouldn't have been a problem if he used his own earnings, but his salary couldn't cover it all, leaving me to foot the bill. With the constant mistreatment from Robert and his parents, divorce started seeming like the only way out. Since we didn't have kids yet, I felt the decision wasn't as complicated, so I began preparing for the divorce. When I brought up the topic to Robert, he'd avoided it and refused to confront the situation. Divorce? I'm too tired today. I'm going to bed. He'd brush it off. Wait, Robert. We need to seriously discuss this today, I'd insist. But he'd ignore me and quickly retreat to the bedroom, persistently avoiding the conversation. I got a call from my mom during that time. Hi, Mom. What's going on? Listen carefully. It's about your dad. According to her, a recent checkup revealed that my father was sick and needed urgent hospitalization. Got it. I'll head to the hospital right away, I said, rushing to prepare. As I was getting ready to leave, Robert asked where I was going, and I explained about my dad's situation. But he just replied with a nonchalant Disappointed by Robert's lack of concern, especially considering it was about his father-in-law, I focused on going to the hospital without paying him any more mind. When I got there, I joined my mom to hear the doctor's diagnosis. Turns out my dad had cancer, and his time was limited. Both Mom and I were stunned. We debated whether to tell him the truth about his condition, but knowing he'd want to be fully informed, we decided to be honest with him. Returning home devastated, I was met with Robert's insensitive question, "Back from your dad's hospital, huh? How bad is it?" Despite my anger at his tone, I shared the grim news about my father. His response was callous. "Oh, weren't you talking about divorce? If you want to stress out your already ailing father with our divorce, I'm up for it any time." His despicable comment plummeted my feelings for him even lower. But I didn't want to burden my father further. Despite Robert's smug claims about being ready for divorce, whenever we discussed it, he seemed even more pleased. With my workload and a desire to avoid divorce discussions, I focused on being there for my father. Avoiding the topic of divorce seemed like a victory to Robert, worsening his attitude. "So, what about your dad's inheritance? How much are we talking about? I'm his son-in-law, so I should get a share, right?" "Can't wait?" Robert asked eagerly. "That's ridiculous. My dad is still alive. How can you even bring that up?" "Shut up. Don't raise your voice at me." No matter how much I objected, Robert seemed unaffected. His constant speculation about what he might get after my father's passing disgusted me. So, I started staying at my parents' house. I told my mom that I'd be staying there for a while since it was closer to the hospital. After some time, my father passed away after his battle with illness. He left this world peacefully, as if he were asleep. My mom and I cried so much it felt like we'd run out of tears. But with funeral arrangements to be made, we couldn't dwell in our sorrow. I called Robert to inform him about my father's passing and the funeral date. Although I still wanted a divorce, I felt obligated to let him know since we were technically still married. "So, your dad finally passed away. Sorry for your loss. I don't feel like attending the funeral. Too much of a hassle," he said casually. Despite my suspicions, Robert showed no signs of sadness. I had hoped he would at least come to the funeral, but it seemed even that was asking too much. Seeing his indifference, I not only lost any remaining feelings for him, but began to detest him. I regretted marrying a man who concealed such a cruel side. "Do whatever you want," I replied, surprised by my own coldness. "Why are you so upset?" "Oh, and I'm curious about the inheritance," Robert taunted. Unable to bear his mocking laughter, I cut him off and ended the call. In the end, Robert didn't show up for my father's funeral. Some called him heartless, but I believed it was for the best that he stayed away and didn't tarnish my father's final farewell. In truth, I felt relieved he didn't attend. After the funeral, a family meeting was arranged, including my mother and me, to discuss the inheritance. There were talks about who would receive what, but since my father had made decisions before his passing, everything was settled smoothly. Feeling like I had finally found some closure, I decided to head back home. But as soon as Robert saw me, he dropped a bombshell. "Hey, it's been a while. I've decided to use the $1 million you inherited to renovate the family house." "What?" I was so taken aback that my voice faltered. I hadn't discussed the inheritance situation with Robert. How did he know about the $1 million? And why was he planning to spend it on home renovations? Still reeling from the shock, I asked Robert, "What do you mean? I have no idea about any large sum of money." With a chuckle, Robert responded, "I had a chat with your mom. I may have nudged her a bit, hinting that if she didn't spill the beans about the inheritance, I might consider divorce. She quickly spilled everything." It turned out that Robert had coerced my mother into revealing details about the inheritance. "You're despicable, threatening my mother like that just to find out." "That's a low blow," I exclaimed, my voice rising without me even realizing it. "I don't care. The renovations are already underway with that $1 million. You did what?" "Yep, lucky me for snagging that cash." "Good thing we're still hitched," Robert retorted smugly. While I was preoccupied with funeral arrangements and other tasks, Robert had already arranged for the renovations using the inheritance. I was speechless. You're obsolete now, but I'm feeling generous. You have two options: move in with my folks or file for divorce. Robert's smirk was downright repulsive. I sighed deeply and replied calmly, I choose divorce, but I won't regret it. Robert laughed dismissively, as if I'd regret anything. With that, he handed me a lawyer's business card. From now on, we'll handle everything through this lawyer. And don't forget to transfer the inheritance to my account, he added. Silently, I packed my belongings and left. Even as I walked out the door, Robert kept reminding me, don't forget about the inheritance. When I recounted everything to my mother, she seemed taken aback. She hadn't realized how strained things were between Robert and me. She also apologized for divulging details about the inheritance to Robert. It's all right, Mom. I should have told you everything. But Robert threatening you is the worst part. I reassured her, then asked if I could stay at our family home until I found a new place. She readily agreed. The following day, my phone buzzed incessantly with calls from Robert, all of which I ignored. Eventually, Robert showed up at my parents' house, ringing the doorbell persistently and causing a commotion. Despite my attempts to ignore him, Robert refused to leave and continued to shout loudly outside. Hey, open the door. I know you're in there. Feeling overwhelmed by his aggressive behavior, my mother suggested, Caroline, maybe you should talk to him to prevent any further disturbance for the neighbors. It might not lead to anything productive, but if things escalate, we'll call the police. All right, I understand, I replied reluctantly. With Robert showing no signs of leaving, I reluctantly opened the door partially, leaving the security chain latched. This is getting out of hand, Caroline. When are you transferring that $1 million? I can't afford the renovations without it, Robert shouted, attempting to shake the door and break the chain. Remaining calm, I responded to Robert. It's under consideration. Confused by my reply, Robert looked puzzled and asked, What do you mean, under consideration? I confronted him with the truth, saying, What I inherited was my father's vacation house. It's not in cash, so I can't transfer it to you. Robert's eyes widened in shock. But then, I had something that surprised me too. How did you manage to secure a $1 million renovation contract? Usually, they wouldn't agree without proof of funds. Well, I have a relative who owns a construction company. I mentioned I'd be receiving $1 million soon, so they skipped the usual checks, Robert explained, looking stunned. If that's the case, remember when I warned you before we decided to divorce? I reminded him. I did warn you properly. You've got to be kidding me. I already paid a deposit of $3,000. I planned to pay the rest in installments, but now I can't. What am I supposed to do? Robert panicked, continuing to fuss. The wife's property is the husband's too, right? Even if it's not in cash. Hand over that $1 million vacation home. We're still married, right? You've got it all wrong, Robert. Inherited property isn't shared, it's solely mine. Not a cent goes to you. And just so we're clear, we're not a couple anymore. We're total strangers, I asserted firmly. Upon hearing this, Robert's expression shifted from despair to rage, his face turning beet red as he began screaming louder than ever. Stop playing games. I'm calling off the divorce. Give me the inheritance right now, he demanded, attempting to grab me through the door gap. Witnessing the altercation, my mother swiftly dialed the police. Robert withdrew his arm upon hearing her on the phone, but then smirked unexpectedly. I'm done with you, he sneered before fleeing the scene. After he left, the police arrived. While the doorbell camera footage seemed to suggest action would be taken, the officers advised me to prioritize my safety and to avoid engaging with Robert in the future, regardless of the circumstances. They instructed me to keep the doors locked and, if necessary, pretend I wasn't home. 3 days later, I received another call from the police regarding the documentation concerning my father's real estate. When I returned to my parents' house after divorcing Robert, I had put the real estate documents in my bag, only to discover they had vanished. Upon being informed that the documents were found, I headed to the police station where Robert was unexpectedly present. To my shock, It turned out that Robert was the thief who stole the documents. As I demanded an explanation, exasperated, Robert wore a sullen expression and muttered, "You thought there might be cash in my bag since I inherited $1 million, right? So when you went through my stuff, you stumbled upon some important-looking documents related to the inheritance and decided to take them." Robert explained that he hadn't examined the documents closely at the time. It was only after learning from me that the $1 million wasn't in cash, but a vacation house that he realized the documents he took were the property title of that house. Later, Robert, assuming that selling the property title would convert the inheritance into cash, took it to a real estate agent, accompanied by my in-laws, to initiate the selling process. However, upon my arrival, the realtor informed me that since the title was still in my father's name, they couldn't proceed with the sale. As the inheritance division discussion had just taken place, I was in the process of finding a notary to transfer the title to my name. Even if the inheritance had been finalized, the property would still be under my name, making it difficult for Robert to sell it without my consent. In frustration, I demanded that they purchase the property since it belonged to my father-in-law. Their response was to call the police on me, likely due to Robert's aggressive behavior, which raised suspicion among the employees. As I stood in shock, Robert began making absurd claims to the police officer. "I was just trying to sell it on her behalf. I didn't steal anything. I haven't done anything wrong. Please let me go," he pleaded, contradicting his earlier admission of taking the documents. Remaining composed, I clarified to the officer, "That's not true. I didn't ask him to sell anything. He stole it on his own. Plus, the documents he took were just copies, not the originals. Even if he tried, he couldn't have sold them." "You set me up. Don't play games with me," Robert shouted furiously, spitting in anger. I responded icily, "What are you even talking about? You stole on your own, and now all you do is spout nonsense. Just face the consequences of your criminal actions." Frustrated, Robert bit his lip, and as a result, he was arrested for theft. With news of Robert's arrest and the loss of the $3,000 deposit broadcasted, my in-laws, now exposed as the parents of a criminal, were compelled to relocate from their town. Later, they seemed to hold a grudge against the real estate agency that reported Robert, resorting to making harassing calls and spreading rumors. The real estate agency, understandably outraged, filed a lawsuit against them for obstructing business and attempted fraud, as they had tried to sell property they didn't own. To avoid a court case, my in-laws had to pay a significant amount in damages. In their desperation, they reached out to me for help. "Caroline, please. We used up our savings for the deposit, and now we're in debt to pay the settlement." My ex-mother-in-law's voice trembled with urgency, but I felt no sympathy. "Why are you asking me for help? I'm divorced from Robert, and as far as I'm concerned, you're strangers to me now." I responded firmly. She pleaded, "You're wealthy, aren't you? Can't you spare some money? We'll pay you back, I promise." "I don't believe that for a second. I'm ending this call. Don't contact me again," I replied coldly, before hanging up and blocking both their numbers. Robert's number had been blocked long ago. Knowing Robert knew where my parents lived, I decided to sell our family home and moved with my mother for safety. As for the $1 million vacation house, I put it back on the market, and it sold without any issues. Now my mother and I live peacefully, cherishing the memories of my father.
The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was in the library, cramming for my organic chemistry final. My phone buzzed with a notification from the scholarship office, and my blood ran cold as I read the subject line. Urgent. Academic performance review required. My hands trembled as I opened it. Dear Ms. Sarah Coleman, we have received concerning documentation regarding your academic performance. Please report to the financial aid office immediately with your parents to discuss the continuation of your merit scholarship. Time-sensitive matter. I stared at the screen, confused. My grades were perfect. I'd maintained a 4.0 GPA for 3 straight years. This had to be a mistake. But the "with your parents" part made my stomach churn. Why would they need my parents there? I practically ran across campus to the financial aid building, my backpack bouncing against my spine. As I rounded the corner to the office, I stopped dead. Through the glass doors, I could see them, my parents, sitting in the waiting area, dressed in their Sunday best. My mother was examining her nails with studied casualness. My father was reading something on his phone, a slight smirk playing at his lips. They weren't supposed to be here. They lived 3 hours away and hadn't visited once since dropping me off freshman year. Sarah, my mother's voice was syrupy sweet as I entered. There you are, sweetheart. We were so worried when the school called us. The school hadn't called them. I knew that immediately, which meant they had called the school. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, honey, my father said, standing and putting his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that probably looked paternal to observers, but felt like a python's grip to me. We're just here to help sort out this little situation. Before I could respond, Mrs. Davidson, the scholarship coordinator, appeared in the doorway. Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, Sarah. Please, come in. The office was cramped, made smaller by the presence of several other people. Mrs. Davidson sat behind her desk, flanked by 2 other administrators I didn't recognize. But in the corner, almost hidden behind a filing cabinet, sat Professor Williams, my biochemistry professor and academic advisor. Please have a seat, Mrs. Davidson said, her face grave. We need to discuss some serious concerns about Sarah's academic performance. I opened my mouth to speak, but my mother cut me off. We're just devastated, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she produced from nowhere. We had no idea Sarah was struggling so badly. Struggling? I said. I'm not. Denial won't help you now, Sarah, my father interrupted, his voice stern. We've seen the transcripts. Mrs. Davidson cleared her throat and pulled out a folder. Yes, the transcripts your parents provided are concerning. According to these documents, you've failed every class this semester. Multiple F's across the board. She laid the papers out on the desk, and I leaned forward, my mind reeling. There they were, official-looking transcripts with my name, student ID, and a row of F's where my A's should have been. These are fake, I said immediately. These are completely fake. I have straight A's. I can show you my actual grades right now on the student portal. Sarah, my mother's voice turned sharp. Stop lying. This is exactly the behavior that got you into this mess. The drinking, the parties, the boys. What? I stared at her in disbelief. I don't drink. I spend every weekend in the library. My father shook his head sadly. This is what addicts do, Mrs. Davidson. They lie, even when confronted with evidence. We've been trying to get her help, but she refuses to come home where we can monitor her properly. That's when it clicked. This was about control. It had always been about control. 3 years ago, when I'd gotten the full scholarship to study biochemistry, they'd been furious. They'd wanted me to stay home, to go to the community college where my mother worked, to live under their roof and their rules forever. The scholarship had been my escape route, and they'd been trying to drag me back ever since. I think we should discuss. Mrs. Davidson began, but Professor Williams suddenly stood up. Actually, he said, pulling out his laptop, I'd like to share something interesting. Everyone turned to look at him. He was a quiet man, usually content to observe from the sidelines, but there was something different about his expression now. What's this about, Professor? Mrs. Davidson asked. Well, Professor Williams said, opening his laptop and connecting it to the room's display screen, I have a rather unusual habit. Call it professorial paranoia. But I BCC myself on every single grade submission, every email to the registrar, every academic document I file. My parents exchanged a quick glance. I also record all my office hours, with student permission of course, for quality assurance, he continued. So imagine my surprise when I saw these alleged transcripts showing Miss Coleman failing my class, when I have documented evidence of her A+ performance. The screen lit up with email after email, all showing my actual grades, timestamps, official submissions, a perfect record. This must be a mistake, my mother stammered. We got these transcripts directly from the registrar's office. Did you? Professor Williams asked mildly, because I have here an email from the registrar stating they've had no contact with you whatsoever. In fact, they flag any parent requests for transcripts of students over 18 without written consent. My father's face was turning red. How dare you imply? I'm not implying anything, Professor Williams said. I'm stating facts. But there's more. He clicked to a new screen. Miss Coleman, did you know your parents visited campus last week? I shook my head, stunned. Security footage, he explained, showing a grainy video. Here they are entering the computer lab in the library. And here. He clicked again. It's the login record showing someone accessed the transcript template files from that exact computer at that exact time. Files that are supposedly secure but can be found if someone knows where to look. Say, if one of them works at a community college with similar systems. My mother's face had gone pale. Mrs. Davidson leaned forward. Are you suggesting these transcripts were forged? I'm not suggesting anything, Professor Williams repeated. But I did take the liberty of inviting someone else to this meeting. The door opened and a campus security officer entered, along with a woman in a suit. This is Detective Morrison from the City Police Department, the officer said. She specializes in fraud cases. Fraud? My father stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help our daughter. By submitting falsified documents to a federal financial aid office, Detective Morrison asked. That's a felony, Mr. Coleman. Fraud involving federal education funds can result in up to 5 years in prison and $20,000 in fines. We did. My mother started. Additionally, Professor Williams continued, still calm. I have here a recording from Miss Coleman's visit to my office hours last week, where she mentioned her parents had been pressuring her to leave school. Sarah, you gave me permission to record that session, correct? I nodded, remembering. I've been crying, telling him about their constant calls, their threats, their attempts to sabotage my education. He played a short clip where my voice, shaky with tears, described how my parents had threatened to find a way to force me home if I didn't leave voluntarily. That's taken out of context, my father shouted. Is it? Professor Williams asked. Because I also have emails from Ms. Coleman's other professors all confirming her excellent performance. Dr. Martinez in organic chemistry says she's the top student. Professor Thompson in physics calls her exceptional. Should I continue? The room was silent except for the hum of the laptop. Here's what I think happened, Detective Morrison said, pulling out a notepad. You wanted your daughter to come home. When she refused, you decided to force the issue by making her lose her scholarship. You came to campus, accessed the computer systems, probably using Mrs. Coleman's community college credentials, and created false transcripts. Then you submitted them to the financial aid office, hoping Sarah would have no choice but to return home once her funding was cut. You can't prove that, my mother said, but her voice was weak. Actually, the detective said, we can. Digital forensics is quite advanced these days. Every document created leaves a trail. Every login is recorded. And forging academic documents is a serious crime. Professor Williams turned to me. Sarah, I want you to know that all of your actual professors have been notified of this situation. We've all submitted letters to the scholarship committee confirming your real academic standing. Your scholarship is safe. I felt tears streaming down my face, relief, anger, vindication all mixing together. As for you, Detective Morrison turned to my parents, you have 2 choices. We can handle this criminally, which means arrests, trials, and likely jail time. Or we can handle this through a civil agreement where you cease all contact with Sarah, pay restitution for the time and resources wasted on this investigation, and undergo mandatory counseling. You can't stop us from seeing our daughter. My mother shrieked. Actually, I said, finding my voice at last, I can. I'm filing for a restraining order. Today. Sarah, please, my father's tone changed, becoming wheedling. We only wanted what was best for you. You don't understand the world. No, I cut him off. You don't understand. I'm not your property. I'm not your prisoner. I'm a grown woman with a 4.0 GPA, a full scholarship, and a future in biochemical research. And I'm done with both of you. Mrs. Davidson, who had been silent through most of this, finally spoke. Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, I'm going to have to ask you to leave campus immediately. You're now banned from all university property. Security will escort you out. As my parents were led away, my mother shooting me one last venomous look, Professor Williams put a gentle hand on my shoulder. Are you all right? He asked. Why did you do all this? I asked him. The BCCs, the recordings. He smiled sadly. I had a student once, years ago. Brilliant girl, pre-med. Her family sabotaged her education to keep her under their control. By the time we figured out what was happening, it was too late. She'd lost her scholarship and had to drop out. I swore I'd never let it happen again. Mrs. Davidson apologized profusely for the ordeal and assured me my scholarship was secure. The detective gave me information about filing a restraining order and victim services on campus. As I left the office, my phone buzzed with texts from my parents, threats, pleas, accusations. I blocked both numbers without reading them all. That night, I sat in my dorm room, looking at my real transcripts on my laptop. All A's, just as they should be. My roommate brought me tea and sat with me while I processed everything. They really thought they could get away with it, I said, still in disbelief. Narcissists always do, she replied. But you had something they didn't count on, a professor who gave a damn. The next day, I changed my major. I added a minor in criminal justice to my biochemistry degree. Professor Williams wrote me a recommendation letter for a summer internship with the FBI's Forensic Science Division. My parents took the civil agreement probably because their lawyer told them they'd definitely lose in court. I haven't spoken to them since. Sometimes I wonder if they ever really loved me or if I was just another thing they needed to control. But mostly, I don't think about them at all. I'm too busy studying, researching, and building the life they tried to steal from me. And Professor Williams? He still BCCs himself on everything. He also started teaching a seminar on recognizing and documenting academic fraud. The first slide of his presentation is always the same. Trust but verify. And always keep receipts. The restraining order was approved without challenge. Turns out judges don't look kindly on parents who commit federal fraud to control their adult children. My parents had to pay $10,000 in restitution and complete 200 hours of community service. I graduated summa cum laude. Professor Williams hooded me at the ceremony, standing in for the family who wasn't there. As I walked across that stage, I thought about how differently things could have gone if he hadn't been watching, documenting, protecting. Now I work in forensic biochemistry, helping solve crimes through science, and yes, I BCC myself on everything too. Because Professor Williams was right, always keep receipts. You never know when someone will try to rewrite your story. But with the right evidence, the truth always wins in the end. The roar started low, like distant thunder rolling across the parade ground. 500 voices, perfectly synchronized, growing louder with each repetition. Martinez, Martinez, Martinez. I stood at attention on the stage, my Marine Corps dress blues immaculate in the morning sun, 3 stars gleaming on each shoulder. Below me, the entire 1st Marine Division had broken protocol, abandoned their ceremonial silence to chant the name their commanding general had earned in blood and fire. In the VIP section, my father sat frozen, his face draining of color as he finally understood. The daughter he'd dismissed just hours earlier as someone who probably files papers was the General Martinez these battle-hardened Marines were cheering for. I allowed myself the smallest smile. He'd wanted to know what I did for a living. Now he was getting his answer. The chanting had started spontaneously when I'd taken the podium, sparked by Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, a Marine I personally pulled from a burning vehicle in Fallujah 15 years ago. It spread through the formation like wildfire, from the veterans who'd served under me in Iraq to the newest privates who'd only heard the stories. My aide, Colonel Thompson, leaned in. "Should I restore order, ma'am?" "Let them finish," I said quietly. "They've earned the right." Because these weren't just Marines. They were my Marines, and every single one of them knew that the papers I filed had brought them home alive. Growing up as the daughter of Master Sergeant Carlos Martinez, retired, meant growing up in the shadow of a very specific kind of Marine. My father was Old Corps through and through, a Vietnam veteran who believed real Marines were defined by physical prowess, loud voices, and the ability to break things professionally. I was none of those things. Where my brothers Diego and Miguel were built like linebackers, I was small and wiry. Where they excelled at sports and roughhousing, I excelled at mathematics and strategic thinking. Where they could do 100 push-ups without breaking a sweat, I could dismantle complex problems and see patterns others missed. Sophia's got a good head on her shoulders, my father would tell his Marine buddies, but she's not built for the course. Too small, too quiet, better suited for office work. He'd say it affectionately, like he was protecting me from disappointment. But each time, it cut a little deeper. The message was clear. Real Marines looked like my brothers. Real Marines were loud and physical. Real Marines were not bookish daughters who solved puzzles for fun and preferred chess to football. So when I announced at 18 that I'd been accepted to the Naval Academy with a Marine Corps contract, he'd laughed. Actually laughed. Maija, he'd said, still chuckling, the course isn't summer camp. You can't think your way through boot camp. Why don't you consider the Air Force? They need smart people behind desks. But I went anyway, graduated top of my class at Annapolis. Survived the basic school not through brute strength but through tactics, endurance, and outthinking every challenge. When others relied on muscle, I relied on strategy. When they powered through obstacles, I found efficient solutions. My father attended my commissioning, stood in the crowd as I took my oath as a second lieutenant. But afterward, at the reception, I heard him telling his cousin, "She'll probably end up in administration. Somewhere safe, filing paperwork. That's better anyway. The real Marines, the fighters, they need good support staff." Support staff. Even as I pinned on my gold bars, even as I prepared to lead Marines in combat, he saw me as support staff. So I stopped trying to convince him otherwise. I deployed to Iraq in 2003 as an intelligence officer, but let him believe I spent my time in air-conditioned offices. When I earned my first Bronze Star for developing a signals intelligence program that prevented dozens of IED attacks, I told him it was for administrative excellence. When I made captain and took command of a company in Anbar province, I let him think it was a desk job. The truth was far different. The truth was that I spent my nights analyzing patterns in enemy activity, developing predictive models that kept my Marines one step ahead of insurgents. The truth was that my paperwork included operational plans that saved lives, intelligence assessments that prevented ambushes, and tactical innovations that changed how the Marine Corps fought urban warfare. But the real truth, the one that would have shocked my traditional father, was that I didn't just file papers. I led from the front. The turning point came in Ramadi, 2006. I was a major by then, serving as operations officer for 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. The city was hell on earth, IEDs on every corner, snipers in every window, death waiting behind every door. One night, our intel suggested a high-value target in a compound on the east side. The battalion commander wanted to send a rifle company, but something in the intelligence pattern bothered me. I spent hours poring over signals intercepts, satellite imagery, patrol reports. And then I saw it, the setup. The target was bait. The real ambush was waiting for our reaction force. I tried to explain, but time was running out. The colonel was under pressure from higher to act on the intel. So I did something that would define my career. I volunteered to lead a small reconnaissance team to verify the intelligence personally. Major Martinez, the colonel said slowly, "You're an intel officer. Your place is here, analyzing." "With respect, sir, my place is wherever I can best protect Marines. And right now, that's on the ground, preventing a massacre." I took 6 volunteers, Marines who trusted my instincts despite my reputation as a desk officer. We moved through the dark streets of Ramadi like ghosts, using routes I'd memorized from hundreds of hours of map study. When we reached the compound, my suspicions were confirmed. The high-value target was a mannequin. The buildings surrounding our planned assault route were packed with insurgents and explosives. We called in the trap's location. Artillery reduced the ambush sites to rubble. The rifle company that would have walked into a death trap instead swept through to find nothing but destroyed enemy positions and dead insurgents. 37 Marines went home to their families because I'd refused to just file papers. Word spread. The quiet intel major who'd personally led a recon team into the deadliest city in Iraq. The officer who'd risked her career and life because she'd seen something others missed. Suddenly, Marines looked at me differently, not as support staff, but as a leader who put their lives above protocol. But I never told my father. When I came home on leave, he'd ask about my deployment, and I'd talk about reports and analysis. He'd nod knowingly and change the subject to Diego's exploits as an infantry officer or Miguel's selection for Force Recon. "At least you're safe," he'd say. "Let your brothers do the dangerous stuff. You keep filing those papers, Major." The years passed, captain to major to lieutenant colonel. Each rank brought more responsibility, more Marines under my command, more operations where intelligence and tactics merged into something revolutionary. I pioneered new ways of fighting, using data analysis to predict enemy movements, developing algorithms that identified IED patterns, creating intelligence-driven operations that minimize casualties while maximizing effectiveness. In Afghanistan, as a colonel commanding a regiment, I implemented what became known as the Martinez method, a fusion of traditional Marine aggression with surgical intelligence precision. We'd strike where the enemy was weakest, avoid where they were strongest, always staying 3 steps ahead through careful analysis of patterns others dismissed as random. My Marines started calling me the prophet because I seemed to predict enemy actions before they happened. What they didn't see were the 18-hour days spent analyzing data, the countless scenarios gamed out on paper, the mathematical models that turned chaos into predictable patterns. But the best part, the part that would have baffled my traditional father, was that I never asked my Marines to do anything I wouldn't do myself. When the intelligence pointed to danger, I led from the front. When the analysis suggested an opportunity, I was first through the door. I earned their respect not through volume or physical dominance, but through competence and courage. They followed me not because I could do more pull-ups, I couldn't, but because I could see the battlefield in ways that kept them alive. By the time I pinned on my first star as a brigadier general, I'd served in every major combat operation of the past 2 decades. My methods had been studied at the War College, implemented across the course, credited with saving hundreds of lives. But to my father, I was still his quiet daughter who probably had a nice safe desk job somewhere. Yesterday had been typical. I'd flown home for my nephew's graduation from boot camp, Diego's son, following in a family tradition. At the celebration dinner, my father held court as always, telling stories about real Marines while I sat quietly at the end of the table. Tio Carlos, one of the young cousins, asked, "What does Tia Sofia do in the Marines?" My father waved dismissively. "Oh, she works at some base administration, I think. Probably files papers, handles logistics, that kind of thing." He smiled at me condescendingly. "Important work, keeping us fighters supplied, right, Maija?" I'd simply nodded. "Something like that, Dad." He'd already turned back to his audience. "Now let me tell you about the time your cousin Miguel fast roped from a helicopter in Afghanistan." What he didn't know was that today, I was taking command of the 1st Marine Division, 20,000 Marines, the most storied division in the course, and they'd chosen me to lead them. The quiet daughter who filed papers would be responsible for the very fighters my father idolized. I hadn't told him about the ceremony, just mentioned I had a work thing to attend at Camp Pendleton. He barely looked up from his beer. "Well, don't let us keep you from your paperwork," he'd said, getting another laugh from the table. Now, standing on the parade ground with those same 20,000 Marines chanting my name, I wondered what he was thinking. The ceremony had been broadcast live on the base channel. Someone in the family would have seen it, would have called him, would have said, "Carlos, isn't Ed Sofia on TV?" The chanting finally died down as Command Sergeant Major Williams called the formation to order. I stepped to the microphone, looking out at the sea of dress blues. "Marines," I began, my voice carrying across the parade ground without shouting. Another thing that would have surprised my father. "You honor me with your welcome, but the honor has always been mine, to serve alongside you, to lead you, to bring you home." A murmur of approval rippled through the ranks. "They call me the prophet," I continued, allowing a small smile. "But there's no magic to what I do, no crystal ball. Just careful analysis, detailed planning, and the fundamental belief that every Marine life is precious. That every risk must be calculated. That every decision must be weighed against the cost in blood." I paused, meeting eyes across the formation. "Some of you served with me in Ramadi, where we turned intelligence into ammunition. Others in Helmand, where we proved that brains and bullets together are unstoppable. Many of you know the Martinez method not from textbooks, but from living it. Striking smart, moving fast, staying alive." Nods throughout the formation. These Marines knew. "But what you may not know," I said, my voice softening, "is that every operation I planned, every risk I calculated, every decision I made, was guided by a simple principle my father taught me, even if he didn't know it." I saw the press cameras zoom in, sensed the crowd leaning forward. "He told me I was too small to be a real Marine, too quiet, better suited for paperwork than fighting. I smiled. He was right about the paperwork. I filed a lot of papers. Operations orders that dismantled insurgent networks. Intelligence reports that prevented ambushes. Casualty reports that, thank God, stayed shorter because we fought smarter. A few Marines laughed, understanding. So yes, I file papers. I analyze data. I solve puzzles. And I turn all of that into operations that bring Marines home alive. That's not traditional Marine Corps leadership. But then again, I looked directly at the camera, knowing my father would see this. Traditions evolve. The Corps evolves. And sometimes the smallest, quietest Marine in the family becomes the one standing in front of a division. The formation erupted again, this time in organized aura that shook the ground. As the ceremony concluded and I made my way through the receiving line, my aide appeared at my elbow. "General, you have a visitor in your office. Says he's your father." I found him standing by the window, still in the same clothes from last night's dinner. He looked older, somehow smaller. When he turned, his eyes were red. "Sophia," he said, then caught himself. "General Martinez." "Dad," I said simply. He stood there, struggling for words. This man who'd never been at a loss for opinions, who'd spent my entire life explaining what real Marines looked like, couldn't speak. Finally, "The news is saying you're the most decorated female Marine in history." "I'm one of the most decorated Marines, period," I corrected gently. "Gender doesn't matter when you're calling in fire support." He nodded slowly. "They showed your record. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Operations I've never heard of." He paused. "Classified operations." "Yes. You weren't filing papers." "I was, just different papers than you imagined." He moved to my desk, where my awards were displayed. Navy Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Stars with Combat V Purple Heart. His fingers hovered over them like they were holy relics. "You were shot?" he whispered, touching the Purple Heart. "Twice. Fallujah and Helmand. But you never said. You never asked, Dad. You decided who I was the day I joined. Too small, too quiet, destined for desk work. Every time I came home, you'd already written my story. So I stopped trying to correct it." He sank into a chair. "I failed you." "No," I said, sitting across from him. "You motivated me. Every time you said I wasn't built for the real Marine Corps, I worked harder to prove, not to you, but to myself, that there's more than one way to be a warrior." 500 Marines, he said quietly. They chanted your name. My buddies from the VFA were there. They saw their sons, their grandsons cheering for you like, he struggled for words, like you were their hero. "I'm not their hero, Dad. I'm their general. There's a difference." He looked at me then, really looked, perhaps for the first time. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me what I missed. Tell me who you really are." So I did. For the next 2 hours, I told him about Ramadi and Fallujah, about leading Marines through hell and bringing them back, about turning intelligence into action, analysis into victory, about the papers I filed that were written in sweat and blood. When I finished, he was crying, something I'd seen only once before, at my mother's funeral. "I'm so sorry, Maija," he whispered. "I was so busy looking for Marines who looked like me that I missed the one who surpassed me." "Dad." "Now let me say this." He stood, straightened his back. "I spent 40 years in the Corps. Fought in Vietnam. Thought I knew what a Marine looked like." He met my eyes. "I was wrong. A Marine looks like someone who brings other Marines home. A Marine looks like someone who fights smart, not just hard. A Marine looks like you." There was a knock on the door. Colonel Thompson entered. "Sorry to interrupt, General, but the division staff is assembled for your initial briefing." I stood. "I'll be right there." My father stood too. "Sophia." "General, would you mind if I stayed? If I watched you work? I'd like to see what filing papers really means." I considered it. Having him shadow me would be unusual, potentially disruptive. But I saw something in his eyes, not just pride or regret, but genuine curiosity about the daughter he'd never truly known. "Grab a seat in the back," I said. "And Dad, try not to look too shocked when you see me in action." The briefing room was packed with field-grade officers, maps covering every wall, screens displaying real-time intelligence from around the globe. As I entered, 30 Marines snapped to attention. "As you were," I said, moving to the front. "Let's start with the Pacific Theater assessments." For the next 3 hours, I demonstrated what filing papers really meant, analyzing threats across multiple countries, coordinating with intelligence agencies, planning operations that wouldn't make headlines but would prevent conflicts, making decisions that would affect thousands of Marines and potentially millions of civilians. I turned data into strategy, reports into action plans, papers into the complex machinery of modern warfare. And through it all, I felt my father's eyes on me, watching his quiet daughter command a room full of warriors with nothing more than competence and clarity. When it ended, as the staff filed out, he approached slowly. "I understood maybe half of that," he admitted. "But I understood enough. You're not just a Marine, Sophia. You're the future of the Marine Corps." "No, Dad, I'm the present. The Corps has always had Marines like me, thinkers, planners, the ones who multiply force through intelligence. We just didn't fit your image, so you didn't see us." He nodded. "Will you? Could you forgive a stubborn old Marine? Could we start over?" I smiled. Aura, Dad, Aura. That night, at another family dinner, this one impromptu, called by my father, he stood before the assembled relatives and friends. "I need to tell you all something," he began. "For 20 years, I've been telling you that Sophia worked in administration, filed papers, stayed safe while real Marines did the fighting." He paused, voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong. Sophia, General Martinez, has been in more combat than me and her brothers combined. She saved more lives through her intelligence work than any Marine I know. Those papers she files, they're operational plans that have brought entire battalions home alive." He turned to me. "I told people you weren't built for the real Marine Corps. The truth is, the Marine Corps is lucky to be built around Marines like you." The room was silent. Then Diego, my brother who'd always been Dad's favorite warrior, started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Miguel joined. Then cousins, aunts, uncles, until the small dining room thundered with applause. Later, as the evening wound down, my father pulled me aside. "That chant today," he said. "Those Marines, they love you." "They trust me," I corrected. "Love is earned through shared hardship. Trust is earned through competence. I'll take trust." He smiled, a real smile, free of condescension. "You know what? You're right. Trust is harder to earn." He paused. "I trust you, General, and I'm proud to be your father." As I drove back to Pendleton that night, I thought about the journey from the quiet girl deemed unfit for the Corps to the general commanding its most storied division. My father had been right about one thing. I wasn't a traditional Marine. I was something more. I was proof that strength comes in many forms, that warriors don't all look the same, that sometimes the most powerful thing a Marine can do is think before they shoot. Tomorrow, I'd be back at my desk, filing papers that would become operations, that would become victories, that would become Marines coming home to their families. And for the first time in my career, my father would understand that those papers weren't just administration. They were ammunition, and I was one hell of a marksman. The pen felt heavier than it should have in my 19-year-old hands. Mom placed her manicured finger on the signature line, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light streaming through our kitchen window. "Just sign here, sweetie. It's complicated tax stuff, trust structures, and estate planning. Your father and I are just making sure everything's properly organized so you won't have any headaches later." The document was thick, full of legal language that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Something about irrevocable trust transfers and tax optimization strategies. Dad stood behind me, his hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder as he explained how this would protect the family assets and minimize our tax burden. I was a sophomore at State, majoring in psychology, and barely understood my own student loan paperwork, let alone complex estate documents. But these were my parents. Patricia and William Bennett had raised me, supported me, and never given me any reason to doubt their judgment. When they said this paperwork would secure my financial future, I believed them. So I signed. Natalie Bennett in my careful college girl cursive, transferring my $500,000 inheritance from Grandma Rose into something called the Bennett Family Preservation Trust. That was 10 years ago, a decade of assuming I was financially secure, that someday I'd have access to Grandma's nest egg that would help me buy a house, maybe start a business, secure my future. A decade of my parents casually mentioning how well managed the trust was performing, how grateful I'd be someday for their foresight. I had no idea I'd signed away $500,000 to fund my parents' lifestyle while I scraped by on a teacher's salary, splitting rent on a cramped apartment and driving a 15-year-old Honda with a temperamental transmission. The truth came out the way most lies do, accidentally, through a completely unrelated event that pulled on the wrong thread and unraveled everything. It started with a letter from the IRS. Not to me, but to my parents, though it was mistakenly delivered to my apartment because we shared the same last name and similar addresses. I almost forwarded it unopened, but something about the official seal and the words Criminal Investigation Division made me hesitate. I told myself I was just checking to make sure it wasn't something urgent. Identity theft was common, and maybe they needed to know right away. So I opened it. What I found inside changed everything. The letter was notification that William and Patricia Bennett were under investigation for potential tax fraud, wire fraud, and violations of fiduciary duty in connection with the misappropriation of trust assets. It referenced account numbers, transfer dates, and dollar amounts that made my stomach drop. One line stood out like a neon sign. Investigation pertains to the improper transfer of approximately $500,000 from the Rose Bennett Memorial Trust to personal accounts belonging to the trustees. Grandma Rose's trust, my inheritance, the money I'd signed over for tax reasons. I sat on my kitchen floor, still holding the letter, as 10 years of casual lies crystallized into focus. Every time I'd asked about accessing the trust funds, Dad had given me vague explanations about market volatility and tax implications. Every time I'd struggled financially, student loans, car repairs, medical bills, Mom had sympathy but no solutions, despite supposedly managing a trust worth $500,000. Because there was no trust. Not anymore. They used my signature on those documents to legally transfer Grandma's money into their own accounts, then spent 10 years spending it while telling me it was being preserved for my future. My hands were shaking as I called the number on the IRS letterhead. I expected to reach some bureaucratic maze, but the woman who answered was Agent Sarah Chin from the Criminal Investigation Division. "I'm calling about a letter that was delivered to my address by mistake," I said, my voice barely steady. "But I think I might be a victim in this case." 3 hours later, I was sitting in Agent Chen's downtown office, a sterile room with government-issued furniture and motivational posters about tax compliance. She listened to my story with the professional calm of someone who'd heard variations of this tale many times before. "Family financial fraud is more common than people realize," she said, reviewing copies of the documents I brought. "Parents, siblings, trusted relatives, they know exactly which emotional buttons to push to maintain compliance from their victims." "But I signed the papers willingly," I said. "They didn't forge anything." "Willing signature obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation is still fraud," Agent Chen explained. "If they told you this was for tax purposes while actually planning to misappropriate the funds, that's textbook wire fraud. The fact that your family doesn't change the legal implications." She walked me through what the investigation had uncovered so far. My parents had indeed used the trust transfer documents to move Grandma's money into accounts they controlled. Over 10 years, they'd spend it on home renovations, luxury vacations, a boat, and Dad's failed attempt to start a consulting business. "The paper trail is extensive," Agent Chen said, spreading bank statements across the conference table. Wire transfers to home improvement contractors, travel agencies, boat dealers. They weren't even particularly careful about hiding it. Probably because they never expected to get caught. In their minds, they legally convinced me to sign over money that they felt entitled to anyway. After all, it was Dad's mother who'd left the inheritance. In their twisted logic, they were just reclaiming what should have been theirs in the first place. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on several factors. We're building a criminal case based on the tax fraud. They never reported the trust income properly, but the wire fraud charges require proving intent to defraud, which is where your testimony becomes crucial." Agent Chen explained that my signature on the documents, combined with their false representations about the purpose, could constitute wire fraud if they use electronic transfers to move the money. Given that most financial transactions over $10,000 involved wire transfers, this was almost certainly the case. "Are you prepared to testify against your parents?" she asked gently. The question hit me like a physical blow. 10 years of family dinners, holidays, birthday calls. 10 years of them asking about my life while hiding the fact that they'd stolen my financial security. 10 years of watching me struggle while they lived comfortably on money that should have been mine. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. The investigation moved quickly once I became a cooperating witness. Agent Chen had me review bank records, identify transactions, and provide context for various transfers. The evidence was overwhelming, a decade of systematic theft documented in meticulous detail. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed during family interactions. Agent Chen advised me to maintain normal contact while they built their case, so I continued showing up for Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, making small talk while internally screaming. Mom would complain about rising grocery prices while wearing a designer handbag I now knew cost more than my monthly rent. Dad would lecture me on financial responsibility while planning another cruise funded by my stolen inheritance. The cognitive dissonance was nauseating. The confrontation I'd been dreading came sooner than expected. 3 months after my initial meeting with Agent Chen, she called to let me know they were ready to make arrests. We'll be executing search warrants and making arrests tomorrow morning, she said. I wanted to give you advance notice so you're not blindsided if they contact you. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, imagining how it would unfold. Would they be at home? Would the neighbors see? How do you arrest someone's parents for stealing their inheritance? My phone rang at 7:23 a.m. Mom's number, but Dad's voice, shaky and panicked. Natalie, we need you to come over right away. There's been some kind of misunderstanding with the government. They're saying, his voice broke. They're saying we stole money from you. Did you? I asked quietly. The silence stretched long enough that I knew the answer. It's complicated, honey. Can you just come over? We need to explain. No, Dad. It's actually very simple. You told me I was signing trust documents for tax purposes. Instead, you transferred my inheritance to yourselves and spent it. That's called fraud. More silence. Then Mom's voice in the background, crying. How does she know? How does she know? Because I'm not 19 anymore, I thought. Because I opened a letter that wasn't meant for me and discovered that my parents are thieves. The criminal trial lasted 8 months. I testified for 2 days, walking through the documents, the false representations, and the decade of lies that followed. My parents' attorney tried to paint it as a family misunderstanding and claimed they'd always intended to restore the money eventually. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lisa Rodriguez, dismantled that argument methodically. If this was a temporary arrangement for tax purposes, why didn't they tell Ms. Bennett when they transferred the money to their personal accounts? Why didn't they provide annual statements showing the trust's performance? Why, when she asked about accessing funds for legitimate expenses, did they continue to claim the money was tied up in investments? The jury didn't buy the family misunderstanding narrative. Wire fraud, tax evasion, and breach of fiduciary duty. Dad got 3 years federal prison. Mom got 18 months and 5 years probation. But the criminal conviction was only part of the story. The civil restitution was more complex. By the time of sentencing, my parents had spent most of the original $500,000. The boat had been sold, but at a loss. The home improvements couldn't be undone. The vacation money was simply gone. However, the court ordered full restitution with interest, $500,000 plus 10 years of compound interest at the federal rate, bringing the total to nearly $750,000. Since my parents couldn't pay that immediately, their assets were seized and liquidated. The house I'd grown up in, Dad's retirement accounts, Mom's jewelry collection, everything went toward repaying what they'd stolen. It still wasn't enough to cover the full amount, so the court established a payment plan that would garnish their wages and Social Security benefits for the foreseeable future. The emotional aftermath was more complicated than the financial recovery. Dad wrote me letters from prison, rambling explanations about how the trust transfer had been meant as a temporary measure to avoid estate taxes, how they'd gotten in over their heads with expenses, how they'd always planned to make it right. Each letter contained the same hollow refrain: we never meant to hurt you. Mom's approach was different. She oscillated between tearful apologies and bitter resentment that I'd destroyed the family by cooperating with law enforcement. According to her, I should have come to them directly instead of involving outsiders in private family business. The fact that they'd had 10 years to make things right voluntarily seemed lost on her. Extended family reactions were mixed. Dad's siblings rallied around the narrative that I'd been vindictive and ungrateful for sending my parents to prison. Mom's family was more sympathetic, particularly Aunt Linda, who'd apparently suspected something was wrong for years, but hadn't known how to address it. Your grandmother would be heartbroken, Linda told me over coffee 6 months after the sentencing. Not about your parents going to prison, they made their choices, but about the fact that her granddaughter had to fight for 10 years to get what was rightfully hers. The money, when it finally started coming back, felt different than I'd expected. I fantasized for so long about what I'd do with my inheritance: buy a house, travel, maybe go back to school. But getting it back as court-ordered restitution came with emotional baggage that made it hard to enjoy. Every deposit into my account was a reminder of betrayal, of how naive I'd been, of how my parents had looked me in the eye for a decade while stealing from me. The money was mine, legally and morally, but it felt tainted by the process of getting it back. I used part of it for therapy, which proved more valuable than any material purchase. Dr. Martinez helped me work through the complex emotions of being financially victimized by family members. The anger was straightforward, but the guilt was more complicated. It's common for fraud victims to blame themselves, she explained during one of our sessions, especially when the perpetrators are family members. You feel like you should have known, should have been more suspicious, should have protected yourself better. I was 19, I said. I trusted my parents. Exactly. You did what any reasonable 19-year-old would do. The failure wasn't yours, it was theirs for choosing to exploit that trust. 2 years after the trial, I used some of the restitution money to buy a small house. Nothing fancy, but mine. The first night I spent in my own home, I called Agent Chen to thank her. Cases like yours are why I do this job, she said. Family financial fraud is devastating because it doesn't just steal money. It steals trust, relationships, your sense of security in the world. When we can recover some of that, it matters. Dad was released after serving 2 years of his 3-year sentence. He called me once, a stilted conversation where he asked if we could move forward as a family. I told him I needed more time to process everything, which was therapist speak for probably never. Mom finished her sentence and moved to a small apartment across town. She sends birthday cards with generic messages and no return address. I don't respond, but I don't throw them away either. Dr. Martinez says I'll know when and if I'm ready to engage with that relationship again. The financial recovery took 4 years, but I eventually received most of the restitution. The final payment came with a letter from the court noting that the case was officially closed. After fees and interest calculations, I'd recovered $695,000 of the original theft. More importantly, I'd recovered something else: a sense of my own worth and agency. For 10 years, I'd been gaslit into believing that my financial struggles were normal, that the trust was being managed by people who knew better than I did. The legal process had validated what I'd always suspected deep down. I deserved better. I'm 31 now, 12 years removed from that kitchen table where I signed away my inheritance. I still work as a teacher, but now it's a choice rather than a necessity. The house is paid off, my emergency fund is solid, and I'm considering going back to school for my master's degree. Sometimes former students ask me for life advice. When they do, I always tell them the same thing: trust, but verify. Love your family, but understand that love doesn't exempt anyone from accountability. And if someone asks you to sign documents you don't understand, especially for tax reasons, get a second opinion from someone who isn't benefiting from your signature. The FBI agent was right. What my parents did was called wire fraud. But more than that, it was called theft. Not just of money, but of trust, security, and 10 years of my life spent believing lies. The money I eventually recovered was important. But the real victory was learning that I didn't have to accept being victimized just because the perpetrators were family. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones most willing to exploit that love for their own benefit. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to let them. Dad was released early for good behavior and now works as a night security guard, his wages still being garnished for restitution. Mom works part-time at a retail store and lives in a studio apartment. Neither has contacted me in over a year, and I'm okay with that. The Bennett Family Preservation Trust never existed, except on the fraudulent documents they used to steal from me. The only thing it preserved was their lifestyle at the expense of my future. Agent Chen was promoted to a supervisory role and now trains other investigators on family financial fraud cases. She told me recently that my case is used as a teaching example of how trust documents can be weaponized against naive beneficiaries. Sometimes justice looks like handcuffs and prison sentences. Sometimes it looks like a government agent asking simple questions like, "Why didn't you know where your own inheritance was being held?" The answer, as it turned out, was worth $500,000. The conference room felt different this time. Not because anything had physically changed. Same mahogany table, same leather chairs, same view of the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. But yesterday, when I called my parents into this room, everything was different. Because 10 years ago, they had crushed my dreams to fund my brother's fairy tale wedding. And now I was their boss. My name is Jordan Mitchell, and this is the story of how a betrayal at 18 became justice at 28. It started on graduation day. I was valedictorian of my high school class, had been accepted to MIT with a partial scholarship, and was 2 weeks away from starting the next chapter of my life. My parents, Linda and Robert Mitchell, had been saving for my college education since I was born. $80,000 in a dedicated education fund that they'd shown me statements for every year on my birthday. "This is your future, sweetheart," my mother would say, pointing to the growing balance. "Every dollar in here is for your education." I had worked for that future too. While other kids were at parties, I was studying. While they were playing video games, I was in academic competitions. I graduated with a 4.8 GPA, scored 1580 on my SATs, and earned recognition as a National Merit Scholar. MIT wasn't just a dream, it was a certainty backed by years of preparation and that $80,000 safety net. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for college, everything changed. My older brother Trevor, 26 at the time, had been dating his girlfriend Vanessa for 3 years. She came from money. Old money, the kind that came with expectations and social pressures. When Trevor proposed, Vanessa's family made it clear that anything less than a spectacular wedding would be an embarrassment to their family name. Trevor had been working as a sales associate at a car dealership, living paycheck to paycheck, despite being 8 years older than me. Vanessa worked part-time at her father's law firm, more for appearances than out of necessity. Neither of them had any real savings. But Vanessa had dreams, big dreams. She wanted a destination wedding in Napa Valley, a designer dress that cost more than some people's cars, and a reception for 200 guests at a vineyard that charged $300 per plate. The total cost, $85,000. I came home from my graduation party to find my parents sitting at the kitchen table with spreadsheets, wedding magazines, and calculator. Trevor and Vanessa were there too, Vanessa crying delicately into a tissue while Trevor looked stressed and defeated. "Jordan, honey, sit down," my mother said. "We need to talk." I sat down, still wearing my graduation cap, still high from the excitement of finishing high school as valedictorian. I thought maybe they wanted to discuss my move-in plans for MIT or go over my course schedule one more time. "Trevor and Vanessa are in a difficult situation," my father began. "The wedding costs are significantly higher than they anticipated, and Vanessa's family has made it clear that they expect a certain level of presentation. We can't afford it," Trevor said, not looking at me. "Not without help." That's when I noticed the bank statements on the table, my college fund statements. "We've been thinking," my mother continued, "and we've decided to loan Trevor the money from your education fund for the wedding." The words didn't compute at first. Loan, my education fund, wedding. "What do you mean loan?" I asked. "Trevor will pay it back," my father said quickly, "with interest. It's just that he needs it now, and you could take a gap year. Maybe work for a year, save some money, reapply next year." Reapply? My voice cracked. "Dad, I'm supposed to start at MIT in 2 weeks. I've already deferred my other acceptances. My scholarship is for this year." "Scholarships can be renewed," Vanessa said, speaking for the first time. "MIT will understand. It's not like you're the only student who ever took a gap year." I stared at her. This woman who I barely knew was casually dismissing my future like it was nothing. "Besides," she continued, "Trevor really needs this. We need to start our marriage on the right foot. First impressions matter in his industry, and if we have a cheap wedding, it could hurt his career prospects." "Vanessa's right," my mother said. "Trevor needs a perfect start to his married life. This wedding could open doors for him professionally. You're smart, Jordan. You'll figure something out." "You'll figure something out." as if 4 years of college was something I could just improvise. What about my scholarship? I asked desperately. It's worth $30,000 a year, but only if I start this fall. If I defer, I lose it completely. You'll get other scholarships, Trevor said. You're smart. You'll probably get even better ones if you wait a year and improve your application. The casual way he dismissed 4 years of my academic achievements, my acceptance to one of the world's best universities, and a scholarship I'd earned through pure merit was breathtaking. This is my future, I said, my voice shaking. This is everything I've worked for. And this is Trevor's future too, my mother replied. He's starting a family. That's more important than any college. You're being selfish, my father added. Family helps family. When you're successful someday, you'll help us. That's how it works. I looked around the table at these people who were supposed to love me, supposed to support my dreams, supposed to put my future first. Instead, they were asking me to sacrifice everything I'd worked for so my brother could throw a party. I won't do it, I said quietly. It's not your choice, my father said, his voice hardening. It's our money, and we've made our decision. Trevor needs this more than you need college right now. What if he doesn't pay it back? I asked. He will, my mother said firmly. Of course he will. But Trevor wouldn't look at me. Neither would Vanessa. They were already mentally spending my college fund on flowers and champagne and photographer fees. I tried everything. I begged. I pleaded. I offered to take out student loans for the remaining $50,000 I'd need after losing my scholarship. I promised to pay them back the $80,000 with interest after I graduated and got a job. None of it mattered. Their minds were made up. The wedding was spectacular. I worked as a server at the reception, watching my college fund get transformed into ice sculptures and premium open bar service. Vanessa looked like a princess in her $8,000 dress. Trevor looked proud and happy in his designer tuxedo. My parents beamed with pride, telling everyone how beautiful the wedding was, how proud they were of their son. No one mentioned that their daughter was supposed to be starting at MIT instead of serving cocktails to wedding guests. After the wedding, reality set in quickly. MIT wouldn't hold my spot. My scholarship was gone. Other universities have filled their incoming classes. I was stuck. I spent that year working 3 jobs. The catering company during weekends, a retail job during the week, and tutoring high school students in the evenings. I saved every penny I could, but without the scholarship and with college costs rising, I was looking at $200,000 in student loans if I wanted to attend a comparable university. Trevor and Vanessa went on their honeymoon to Europe. 2 weeks in Italy and France, posting pictures on social media of themselves drinking wine in Tuscany and shopping in Paris. When they got back, I asked Trevor about repaying the college fund. We're still getting settled, he said. Vanessa wants to buy a house, and we need to establish ourselves financially. Give us a few years. A few years turned into no payments at all. Trevor got a better job at a different dealership, and they did buy a house. A big house with a mortgage that consumed most of Trevor's improved income. There was never money left over to repay what they owed me. But I had learned something important from losing my college fund. No one was going to hand me my future. I would have to build it myself. I enrolled in community college, taking business and computer science classes while continuing to work full-time. It wasn't MIT, but I was learning. After 2 years, I transferred to the state university with enough credits to graduate in 2 more years instead of 4. During college, I started a small business designing websites for local companies. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I reinvested every dollar I made back into the business, buying better equipment, learning new technologies, hiring other students to help with overflow work. By the time I graduated with my bachelor's degree in business and computer science, my little web design company was generating 6 figures in annual revenue. I had a team of 12 freelancers and contracts with 47 local businesses. But I wasn't satisfied. I had bigger plans. The company where my parents worked was called Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm that had been struggling to adapt to digital marketing trends. They were good at traditional advertising but completely lost when it came to online marketing, social media strategy, and web-based customer acquisition. I had been watching Henderson and Associates for years, studying their client lists, analyzing their weaknesses, understanding their market position. I knew they were ripe for disruption. When I was 25, I launched my own marketing firm, Mitchell Digital Solutions. Instead of competing directly with Henderson Associates, I positioned myself as the solution to their biggest problem, their digital incompetence. I started by coaching their clients who were frustrated with Henderson's inability to deliver modern marketing solutions. Then I hired away their best employees by offering better pay and equity stakes in my company. Within 18 months, Henderson and Associates was bleeding clients and talent. That's when James Henderson, the company founder, approached me about a merger. "We need what you have," he said during our first meeting. "Digital expertise, young talent, modern systems. You need what we have: established relationships, institutional knowledge, a 40-year reputation." The merger made sense for both companies, but I structured it carefully. Mitchell Digital Solutions would acquire Henderson and Associates, not the other way around. I would be CEO of the combined company. The Henderson name would remain for legacy clients, but the company culture, strategy, and leadership would be mine. James Henderson was ready to retire anyway. He was 71 years old and tired of trying to understand Instagram advertising and Google algorithms. He wanted to sell his company to someone who could preserve its legacy while adapting it for the modern world. The acquisition was completed 6 months later. I was 27 years old and the owner of a marketing firm with 85 employees and $15 million in annual revenue. 2 of those employees were my parents. My father worked in the accounting department, the same position he'd held for 12 years. My mother was in client services, managing relationships with long-term Henderson clients. They were both competent employees, well regarded by their colleagues, but not particularly ambitious or innovative. They had no idea their daughter now owned the company where they worked. I waited a full year before revealing the truth. I wanted to observe them as employees, understand their work performance, see how they treated their colleagues and handled their responsibilities. I also wanted to make sure the acquisition was fully integrated and the company was stable under my leadership. During that year, I learned things about my parents' work habits that I found interesting. My father had a tendency to leave early on Fridays. My mother took extended lunch breaks to run personal errands. Neither of them was particularly engaged with the company's digital transformation initiatives. They weren't bad employees, but they weren't great ones either. They were coasting, doing just enough to avoid getting fired while collecting their paychecks and complaining about management decisions they didn't understand. Yesterday, exactly 10 years after they spent my college fund on Trevor's wedding, I decided it was time for a conversation. I had my assistant schedule separate meetings with both of them. "The new owner wants to meet with all department heads and senior staff members," she told them. "Just routine getting to know you meetings." My father came in first, at 2:00 p.m. He knocked on the conference room door and walked in, stopping short when he saw me sitting at the head of the table in a business suit. "Jordan?" He looked confused. "What are you doing here?" "I thought I was meeting with the new owner." "You are," I said calmly. "Please sit down." He sat down slowly, his face showing the exact moment when he realized what was happening. You own this company?" "I do. As of 13 months ago, when Mitchell Digital Solutions acquired Henderson and Associates." The color drained from his face. "But how? When did you? Remember when you told me I figured something out?" I asked. This is what I figured out. For the next 30 minutes, I walked him through my journey. Community college while working 3 jobs. Building a business from nothing. Growing that business into a company large enough to acquire his employer. "Your work performance has been adequate," I told him. "Not excellent, but adequate. You've been taking early Fridays for the past year, which I've documented. Your productivity has declined since the acquisition, though I understand change can be difficult for employees who are set in their ways." "Jordan, I don't know what to say." I had no idea. "I'm not firing you," I said. "You're my father, and despite everything, I don't want to destroy your livelihood. But things are going to change. The early Fridays stop, your performance needs to improve. And we're going to have a conversation about that $80,000 you never paid back." My mother's meeting was at 3:30 p.m. Her reaction was similar: shock, confusion, then a dawning realization of exactly how dramatically the power dynamic had shifted. "You planned this," she said after I'd explained the situation. "You bought this company to get back at us." "No," I said. "I built a business because I needed a future since the one I planned was sold to pay for Trevor's party. Acquiring this company made business sense. The fact that you work here is just convenient. What do you want from us? She asked. I want you to be better employees, I said simply. And I want the money you stole from me, with interest. We didn't steal anything. We borrowed it for Trevor. Did Trevor pay it back? She was quiet for a long moment. He's had some financial difficulties. So you gave away my college fund permanently. You destroyed my scholarship, forced me to find another path, and never intended to make it right. You turned out fine, she said defensively. Look at you now. You're successful. You didn't need college after all. Unsuccessful despite what you did to me, not because of it. Unsuccessful because I refused to let your betrayal define my future. I leaned back in my chair, looking at this woman who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, who had always told me that family comes first. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You and Dad are going to pay me back the $80,000 with 10 years of compound interest at 6% annually. That comes to approximately $143,000. You can pay it back through payroll deductions over the next 5 years. We can't afford that, she protested. Then you'll need to make different choices. Downsize your house. Get rid of the boat Dad bought last year. Cancel your country club membership. Figure it out. You're punishing us for helping our son. I'm collecting a debt that you've ignored for 10 years. This is business, not family. We're your parents. Parents who chose their adult son's party over their teenager's education. Parents who told their daughter to figure it out when they destroyed her future. Parents who never apologized, never tried to make it right, never even acknowledged what they took from me. She was crying now, but I felt no sympathy. I had cried too, 10 years ago, when I watched my dreams disappear into ice sculptures and premium bar service. Trevor's marriage didn't even last, I added. They divorced 3 years ago. Vanessa took half of everything in the settlement, including half the value of the house you helped them buy with my college fund. So your investment in his perfect start returned exactly nothing. That meeting ended with my mother signing a payroll deduction authorization form. My father had signed an identical form an hour earlier. Today, both of my parents are still my employees. They're also my debtors, paying back the money they stole from me one paycheck at a time. They do their jobs adequately, knowing that their daughter, the one they told to figure it out, is watching their performance and measuring their value to the company. Trevor works at another car dealership now, still living paycheck to paycheck, still making excuses for why he can't pay back money he owes. He sends me a Christmas card every year with a note about how proud he is of my success, and how he always knew I'd do great things. I throw the cards away without reading them. The company is thriving under my leadership. We've tripled our revenue, expanded to 4 cities, and I'm looking at acquisition opportunities in other markets. I've built the future I was supposed to have, just 10 years later and entirely on my own terms. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry about what my parents did. The answer is no. Anger is what I felt at 18 when they betrayed me. What I feel now is satisfaction. They taught me that family doesn't mean what I thought it meant. They taught me that promises can be broken when convenient. They taught me that I couldn't depend on anyone but myself. Those were valuable lessons, even if they weren't intended as such. Now, every 2 weeks when their paychecks are automatically reduced by $1,430, they're reminded of those lessons too. And every time they sit in a meeting where I'm making decisions about their workplace, their benefits, their future, they're reminded of the 18-year-old girl they told to figure it out. I figured it out just fine, better than they ever imagined. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and disappointment. My siblings sat in their designer clothes, barely containing their glee, as Mr. Whitman read through Grandma Cecilia's will. $3 million each for Brandon, $3 million for Ashley, $3 million for Marcus. Properties divided equally among them. Investment portfolios transferred. Even her jewelry collection, the one I'd helped her catalog every summer, split 3 ways. And to my granddaughter, Josephine Marie Caldwell. Mr. Whitman paused, adjusting his glasses. I leave the contents of safety deposit box 447 at First National Bank on Meridian Street. That was it. No money. No properties. Just whatever was in a safety deposit box. Brandon snorted. Figures. Even dead, Grandma knew Joey was the family disappointment. Brandon, our mother chided weakly. But she was already eyeing the inheritance tax paperwork, calculating her children's newfound wealth. Ashley didn't bother hiding her smirk. Maybe it's some savings bonds. Enough to pay off those student loans from that art degree. Marcus, the eldest and cruelest, was already on his phone. Probably just her old photos and worthless mementos. Grandma always was sentimental about junk. Mr. Whitman slid a small envelope across the mahogany table. My name was written in Grandma's spidery handwriting. Inside, a single brass key spotted with rust attached to a leather tag that read only 447. That's it, Ashley laughed. Joey gets a rusty key to what? A box of costume jewelry. The worthless grandchild gets worthless junk, Marcus said, standing. Seems fitting. He pulled out his phone, showed me the photos he posted from Grandma's house that morning. My childhood artwork. Photos of me with Grandma. Letters I'd written her from college. All burning in the backyard fire pit. Cleaned out your old room, he said casually. Made space for my home office. Grandma's house is mine now, after all. I fingered the key, staying silent. Let them talk. Let them gloat. Let them sign every document Mr. Whitman placed before them with eager, greedy fingers. Miss Caldwell, Mr. Whitman said quietly when my siblings were distracted with their windfall. The bank closes at 5. You might want to visit sooner rather than later. Something in his eyes, a flicker of knowledge, maybe amusement. I nodded once. The funeral was that afternoon. A lavish affair my siblings had planned to showcase their newfound wealth. Brandon gave a speech about family legacy while wearing a new Rolex. Ashley dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief that cost more than my rent. Marcus talked about preserving Grandma's memory while living in the house where he burned my photos. I sat in the back, the rusty key heavy in my pocket. After the service, relatives I hadn't seen in years suddenly remembered I existed. Joey dear, I heard about the will. Aunt Patricia cooed with false sympathy. So unfair. But then you were never really close to Cecilia, were you? She left me what she wanted me to have, I said simply. A key? Uncle Robert laughed. To what? Her cookie jar. I smiled, said nothing, and left early. Let them gossip. Let them pity poor Joey with her art degree and her rusty key. First National Bank on Meridian Street was an old building, the kind with marble columns and tellers who knew your name. Mrs. Chen at the safety deposit desk smiled when she saw me. Miss Caldwell, we've been expecting you. She took the key, examined it. Box 447. Your grandmother was very specific about the instructions for this box. Instructions? She led me to the vault, past rows of identical boxes. She said you come alone. Said you come after the others had signed everything. Her eyes twinkled. She also said you'd understand why when you opened it. Box 447 was larger than I'd expected. Inside 3 things. 1. A manila envelope, thick with documents. 2. A leather journal, worn and familiar. 3. Another key, modern silver, attached to a tag with coordinates. I opened the journal first, recognizing it immediately. Grandma's investment diary, the one she kept religiously for 60 years. The one my siblings claimed never existed when they ransacked her study looking for financial records. The final entry was dated a week before her death. My dearest Joey, by now your siblings have gleefully divided what they believe is my entire estate. Let them. The money I left them is real, enough to keep them satisfied and stupid. What they don't know is that the millions they receive represent exactly 15% of my actual wealth. You see, my darling girl, while your brothers and sisters spent their visits asking about my will and checking my bank statements, you spent yours asking about my life. While they cataloged my possessions, you cataloged my stories, and in those stories, I told you everything. Remember the tale about your grandfather's foolish investment in that little Seattle coffee company? The one your father laughed at. Starbucks turned those worthless shares into quite a fortune. Remember when I told you about buying useless land in Austin back in the 70s? The parcels your siblings called Grandma's dirt collection? That dirt is now in the heart of the tech district. The key you're holding opens more than a box, Joey. It opens the door to everything I really owned. Everything I kept hidden from grasping hands and greedy hearts. The documents in this box will lead you to 47 commercial properties across 7 states. Investment portfolios worth approximately $280 million. Art collections in climate-controlled storage, yes, including the money your brother said was fake. The vineyard in France your sister claimed I invented. The publishing rights to your grandfather's patents. And the crown jewel, the 1,800-acre ranch in Montana where I taught you to ride. All held in trust, all in companies they never knew existed, all waiting for the only grandchild who loved me for me, not my money. There's one condition, my dear. You must never share this wealth with your siblings. Not out of cruelty, but because they've already shown you who they are. Brandon burned your memories. Ashley mocked your dreams. Marcus destroyed what you loved. They chose their inheritance. Now choose yours. The silver key leads to the ranch. Your real inheritance isn't money, Joey, it's freedom. The freedom to create, to live, to be exactly who you are without apologizing to anyone. All my love, Grandma Cease. P.S. Mr. Whitman has been my lawyer for 40 years. He's the only one who knows the truth. Trust him. He has instructions to help you claim everything properly and quietly. P.P.S. The rusty key? It's from my first apartment, the one where I started with nothing. I kept it to remember that wealth isn't what you're given. It's what you build. You, my dear, have been building all your life. I sat in that small vault room and cried. Not from grief, I'd done that already, but from the sheer magnitude of her faith in me. While everyone else saw the struggling artist, the unmarried granddaughter, the one who couldn't afford designer clothes or fancy cars, Grandma saw the truth. She saw the girl who spent summers learning her recipes instead of asking for money, who helped organize her photos instead of appraising her jewelry, who asked about her childhood in Poland instead of her stock portfolio. The manila envelope contained deeds, titles, account numbers, contact information for lawyers and property managers, an empire hidden in plain sight. The ranch alone was worth more than what my siblings had inherited combined. I called Mr. Whitman from the bank. "Ah, Josephine," he said warmly, "I trust you found everything in order." She left me everything. Not everything, he corrected gently. She left them what they expected, money. She left you what they never understood was valuable. The rest. My siblings. Signed ironclad documents accepting their inheritance as complete and final. They can't contest what they don't know exists. I could hear his smile. Your grandmother was a brilliant woman. She structured everything perfectly. Shall we meet tomorrow to begin the transfers? I hung up and looked at the silver key. The coordinates led to Montana, to the ranch where I'd spent my happiest summers, where Grandma taught me to ride, to paint landscapes, to see beauty in wild things, where my siblings had never bothered to visit because it was too far from civilization. That evening, I attended the family dinner at Marcus's house, Grandma's house. They toasted their good fortune with champagne that cost more than my monthly salary. At least Joey can afford to eat tonight. Ashley laughed, gesturing at the elaborate spread. Consider it our charity. Yeah, Brandon added, already drunk. Maybe we should set up a fund for her. The Failed Artist Relief Foundation. I smiled, sipped water, and let them talk. Marcus showed off his plans to gut Grandma's gardens and install a pool. Ashley bragged about quitting her job to become an investor. Brandon had already bought 2 sports cars. What about you, Joey? Mom asked, trying to be kind. Will you be all right? I know Grandma's oversight must hurt. I'll be fine, I said honestly. Grandma left me exactly what she meant to. A rusty key, Marcus laughed again. To what? Did you even check? I did. And it opened what it was supposed to open. Which was? Ashley pressed, sensing something. I stood gathering my things. A door. To what? Brandon demanded. I looked at them, my siblings who've inherited millions but not wisdom, who've gained wealth but not worth, who'd burned my photos while sitting in a house worth less than the dirt they'd mocked. To the future Grandma wanted me to have, I said simply, good night. I left them there, confused and irritated but not worried. Why would they worry? They had their millions. They had one. The next morning, I met with Mr. Whitman and began the quiet process of claiming my real inheritance. By the end of the week, I was worth more than my siblings would make in 10 lifetimes. But I didn't buy sports cars or designer clothes. I didn't quit my job at the gallery or move from my small apartment. Not yet. Instead, I flew to Montana, used the silver key to open the ranch house, and found one last gift, a studio Grandma had built just for me, with north-facing windows and views of the mountains. On the easel was a note, "Paint your truth, Joey. It's worth more than their lies." 6 months later, my first solo art exhibition opened in New York. The mysterious buyer who purchased the entire collection for $2.3 million remained anonymous. The check was drawn from a company called CLC Investments. Cecilia Louise Caldwell Investments. Thanks, Grandma. My siblings came to the opening, of course. Drawn by the prestige and the free champagne, calculating how to use my sudden success for their benefit. I always knew you had talent, Ashley lied smoothly. We should talk about investing your earnings. Family helps family. Speaking of family, Marcus interjected, you could use a business manager. I'll give you the family discount. Or you could invest in my new venture, Brandon added. Ground floor opportunity. I smiled at them over my champagne glass. Real champagne now, not the cheap stuff I used to drink. That's kind of you all. But I have excellent financial advisors. They've been managing my portfolio for years. Portfolio? Ashley blinked. What portfolio? The one Grandma helped me build, I said truthfully. After all, she had just not the way they assumed. They exchanged glances, calculating, wondering. But what could they do? They'd taken their millions and signed their papers. They'd mocked the rusty key and burned my memories. And now I stood in a gallery wearing a simple black dress and my grandmother's pearl necklace. The real one, not the copy she'd left in the jewelry box they'd divided. The one she'd hidden in the ranch house with a note for Joey's first exhibition. You know, I said quietly, Grandma once told me that wealth isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with it. Easy to say when you have nothing, Marcus scoffed. I smiled. Exactly. They left early, frustrated by my calm and their inability to figure out my sudden success. Let them wonder. Let them assume I got lucky with art sales. Let them sleep soundly in their paid-off houses while I owned the land beneath 100 others. That night, I called Mr. Whitman. I want to set up a foundation for struggling artists, full scholarships, living stipends, no strings attached. Your grandmother would be proud, he said warmly. What shall we call it? I thought of the rusty key still on my keychain. The key to a first apartment, to humble beginnings, to remembering where you came from. The Rusty Key Foundation, I decided. For artists who have everything but opportunity. Perfect. And your siblings? They got what they wanted, I said. Money without meaning. Wealth without wisdom. Exactly what they deserve. I hung up and looked at the gallery walls, now empty of my paintings but full of promise. Tomorrow, I'd fly back to Montana. I had a ranch to run, properties to manage, a fortune to shepherd. But tonight I raised a glass to the woman who saw me clearly, who gave my siblings enough rope to hang themselves with greed, who left me a rusty key that opened every door that mattered. Thanks, Grandma, I whispered, for knowing the worthless grandchild was worth everything. Somewhere in her house, Marcus slept soundly, never knowing he lived in the smallest property in Grandma's true portfolio. Ashley dreamed of investments, ignorant that her millions were pocket change compared to the accounts she'd never known existed. Brandon polished his sports cars, oblivious that I owned the dealership where he bought them. And I held a rusty key and smiled. Because Grandma was right, they'd chosen their inheritance, cash they could count and spend and waste. She'd left me something better, everything else. The key to her first apartment, the deed to an empire, the knowledge that being the worthless grandchild had made me the only one worthy of her real trust. $3 million had bought my siblings' silence, their signatures, their willingness to write me off. It was the best investment Grandma ever made.
The bleach hit my paintings with a sound I'll never forget, like rain on a hot sidewalk. Except it was the sound of 5 years of my life dissolving. I watched in frozen horror as the chemical spread across my canvases, eating through oil paint, destroying layers of work, erasing the exhibition that was supposed to change my life. Amateur trash. My brother's girlfriend Vanessa screamed, wielding the industrial-sized bleach bottle like a weapon, splashing it wildly across the gallery walls. This isn't art. It's pathetic. Just like you, Maya. The Riverside Gallery was packed for my first solo exhibition. 37 pieces representing my journey from homeless teenager to emerging artist. Each painting told a story of survival, of nights spent in shelters, of finding beauty in broken places, and now they were melting, running down the walls in chemical streams. What Vanessa didn't know, what her rage had blinded her to, was the small tripod in the corner with gallery director Sarah Ming's phone mounted on it, broadcasting live to Instagram. The red recording light blinked steadily as 50,000 viewers watched my life's work being destroyed in real time. "Someone stop her," a voice called out, but everyone seemed frozen, whether from shock or fear of the bleach still flying from the bottle. I finally found my voice. "Vanessa, please, stop." She whirled on me, her designer dress now splattered with bleach stains. "You think you're so special? Josh can't shut up about his talented sister, his genius sister, his sister who's going to be famous. What about me? I'm the one with a degree from Parsons. I'm the one who should be having exhibitions." Josh, my older brother, my protector, my biggest supporter, stood in the doorway, his face white with shock. He'd gone to get champagne from his car for the toast. He'd been gone for 3 minutes. 3 minutes was all it took for his girlfriend to destroy everything. "Vanessa," he dropped the champagne, bottle shattering on the gallery floor. "What have you done?" "I did what someone should have done years ago," she screamed. "Shown everyone that your sister is a fraud. Look at this garbage. Street scenes? Homeless people? This isn't art, it's poverty porn." Sarah Ming stepped forward carefully, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Ma'am, you need to put down the bleach. What you're doing is a crime. You're destroying hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of art." "Hundreds of thousands?" Vanessa laughed maniacally. "For this? The large piece you just destroyed was already sold for $75,000. Sarah said calmly. "The buyer is watching this live stream right now." Vanessa's face went pale, but she didn't drop the bottle. Instead, she turned to the painting that meant the most to me, a portrait of my grandmother, the woman who'd raised me after my parents died, who'd lived just long enough to see me get into art school. It was the only painting I'd never sell. "No," I whispered, moving toward her. "Please, not that one." She smiled then, cruel and satisfied, and threw the remaining bleach directly at my grandmother's portrait. The scream that tore from my throat wasn't human. I lunged forward, trying to shield the painting with my body, but the bleach had already hit. I watched my grandmother's painted eyes disappear, her smile melting away, the careful brushstrokes I'd spent 6 months perfecting dissolving into nothing. That's when someone finally acted. A man I didn't recognize tackled Vanessa from behind, knocking the empty bottle from her hands. Security rushed in, too late, always too late, and restrained her. "I want her arrested," she was screaming. "She attacked me. You all saw it. She's jealous because Josh loves me more than her." "Ma'am," one of the security guards said, "you just destroyed an art exhibition, on live stream, to 50,000 witnesses." Sarah Ming was at my side, pulling me away from the ruined portrait. "Maya, breathe. Look at me, breathe." But I couldn't breathe. I was watching 5 years of work drip onto the floor, every late night, every skipped meal to afford paint, every rejection before Sarah finally gave me a chance, all of it was gone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah addressed the shocked crowd while still holding me, "please give us some space. The exhibition is obviously cancelled. We'll be in touch with anyone who had purchases pending." "Wait." A woman stepped forward from the crowd. I recognized her from her photos. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, senior curator at the Modern Art Museum, the woman who was supposed to change my life tonight with an offer for a permanent collection spot. "I'd like to say something." She walked to where Sarah's phone was still streaming, addressing the camera directly. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, curator at MAM. I came here tonight to offer Maya Chen a spot in our permanent collection. What I've just witnessed isn't the destruction of art, it's the birth of something more powerful." She turned to face the crowd, then the camera again. "Art isn't just what hangs on walls. It's the story, the struggle, the artist's journey." Maya's work depicted survival and resilience. What we've just witnessed is her living that truth. The woman who destroyed these paintings has actually created something she never intended, proof that art matters, that it provokes, that it has power. She looked directly at me. "Maya, every piece that was destroyed tonight will be recreated, not by you, you'll create new work, but by forensic art restoration specialists who will use the livestream to rebuild what was lost. And both versions, the destroyed originals and your new work, will be displayed at MAM. This isn't the end of your story, it's the chapter that makes you legendary." Vanessa started laughing hysterically. "You're going to reward her for this? This garbage?" Josh finally found his voice. "Vanessa, you just committed a felony. On livestream, you destroyed hundreds of thousands of dollars in art because you were jealous." "Jealous? Of her? She's nobody, a foster kid who got lucky." "She's my sister," Josh said quietly, "and she's more talented in her little finger than you'll ever be." The police arrived then, taking statements. Watching the livestream replay, Vanessa was arrested for felony vandalism, destruction of property over $100,000, and assault with a caustic chemical. The last charge was added when they realized I had chemical burns on my hands from trying to save my grandmother's portrait. As they led her away, she screamed at Josh, "You're choosing her over me?" "I'm choosing the person who didn't destroy my sister's life work out of jealousy," he replied coldly. "We're done, Vanessa. Your stuff will be outside my apartment by morning." The crowd slowly dispersed, but not before many of them approached me with business cards, offers of support, and promises to share the story. The live stream had gone viral while we were still standing there. Hashtag Justice for Maya was trending. Artists around the world were posting their own work in solidarity. Sarah Ming surveyed the destroyed gallery, then turned to me. "Insurance will cover the full value. Every piece was documented and appraised. You'll be compensated." "It's not about the money," I whispered, staring at the spot where my grandmother's portrait had hung. That painting, it was all I had left of her. Actually, a young man stepped forward, holding a professional camera. "I was photographing the exhibition for Art Week magazine. I have high-resolution images of every piece, including your grandmother's portrait. Every brushstroke, every detail, they're yours." Dr. Morrison pulled out her phone, showing me the Instagram live replay. "Maya, look at the comments. Thousands of them, scrolling too fast to read. This is heartbreaking, but she's going to come back stronger, buying whatever Maya creates next. The girlfriend just made Maya famous worldwide. This is why art matters. Team Maya forever." "Someone start a GoFundMe now." "There's already a GoFundMe," Sarah said, checking her phone. "It's at $200,000 and climbing. People want to support you." Josh knelt beside me, tears streaming down his face. "Maya, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was capable of this. She seemed supportive of your art." "She called it amateur trash," I said numbly. "She was wrong. She was jealous. You're brilliant, and she couldn't stand that I was proud of you." Dr. Morrison's phone rang. She answered, her eyes widening. "Yes, she's here. Yes, I'll tell her." She hung up and turned to me. "That was the Guggenheim. They want to acquire your story, the destroyed works, the documentation, the recreation process, everything. They're calling it Destruction and Rebirth, the Mayachin story. But there's nothing left to acquire," I said. "That's where you're wrong," she said. "The bleach-damaged canvases are now part of the story. They're artifacts of an attack on art itself, combined with the livestream, the restoration process, and the new works you'll create in response. This is bigger than an exhibition. This is art history happening in real time." A woman approached with a tablet. "Maya, I'm Detective Rivera. We need you to watch the live stream to verify events for the prosecution." I watched my exhibition die again on the small screen, but this time, I noticed things I'd missed in the moment. The way people had gasped when they realized what was happening. The way strangers had moved to protect other paintings. The way Josh had looked when he walked in, not just shocked, but heartbroken for me. "She planned this," Detective Rivera said. "We found searches on her phone about bleach and canvas, about how to destroy oil paintings. This was premeditated." "Why?" I asked. "Why would she plan this?" Josh answered quietly. "She applied to show here last month. Sarah rejected her portfolio." Sarah's head snapped up. "Vanessa Morse? The one who sent those derivative fashion photographs?" "That's her," Josh confirmed. "She didn't tell me she'd been rejected. She said she was too good for a small gallery. So she destroyed my exhibition because she couldn't have one?" "Jealousy makes people do terrible things," Detective Rivera said. "But in this case, it's going to cost her. With the value of the destroyed works and the premeditation, she's looking at serious prison time." The next few days were a blur. The story went international. Major news outlets picked it up. The security footage and livestream were played countless times. Art critics wrote pieces about the performance art of the destruction, even though it wasn't intended as such. Vanessa, from her jail cell awaiting bail hearing, tried to claim it was performance art, that she'd been making a statement about privilege in the art world. No one believed her, especially after her jealous rants were broadcast to millions. The GoFundMe reached $500,000. Artists sent me supplies, canvases, offers of studio space. The photographs of my destroyed works were published in a memorial catalog that sold out in hours. But the most unexpected response came from other artists who'd been sabotaged by jealous partners, friends, or family members. They shared their stories, their destroyed works, their journeys back to creation. We became an accidental community, bonded by loss and resurrection. 3 months later, I stood in the Modern Art Museum at the opening of Destruction and Rebirth. The destroyed canvases were displayed in specialized cases, the bleach damage preserved behind protective glass. Next to each ruined piece hung a monitor playing the live stream of its destruction, and beside that, my new interpretation of the same subject. The centerpiece was my grandmother's portrait. The destroyed version looked like a ghost, her face eaten away by chemicals, only hints of what had been. The new version was larger, bolder, painted with a fury and love I hadn't known I possessed. But the most powerful element was the third piece, a collaboration with the forensic restoration team, showing the old painting emerging from the destroyed canvas, like a phoenix from ashes. Vanessa had pled guilty to avoid trial, 3 years in prison, plus restitution I'd never see. Josh hadn't spoken to her since that night. He stood beside me now at the opening, still apologizing months later. "Stop," I told him, "you didn't do this. I brought her into your life. And she brought me here." I gestured to the packed museum. "Look around, Josh, would any of this have happened without that night?" Dr. Morrison approached with a couple who looked familiar from art magazines, mega collectors known for their contemporary art collection. "Maya," Dr. Morrison said, "I'd like you to meet the Hamiltons. They've just acquired the entire Destruction series for their foundation." "Including the grandmother portrait?" I asked, my heart sinking. "I'd hoped to keep that one." Mrs. Hamilton smiled. "All except that one. That stays with you. But we'd like to commission a companion piece, your grandmother as you imagine her now, watching your success." "She'd be horrified." I laughed through sudden tears. "She hated attention. But she'd be proud," Josh added. "So proud." The exhibition was a massive success. Every piece sold. Museums competed for future works. I went from unknown artist to art world sensation, the woman whose work was so powerful it drove someone to destroy it. But late at night, in my new studio, funded by the GoFundMe, I sometimes thought about the original paintings. They're gone forever. Despite the reproductions and restorations, those specific brushstrokes, made during specific moments of my life, can't be recreated. Vanessa took those from me, but she also gave me something, proof that art matters, that it can drive people to extreme actions, that creation and destruction are two sides of the same passionate response to beauty. I'm painting my grandmother again now. In this one, she's standing in the gallery, watching Vanessa destroy the first portrait, but she's smiling, because she knows what I know now, that sometimes destruction is just transformation waiting to reveal itself. The painting is called Thank You, Vanessa. She'll hate that when she gets out of prison and sees it in the permanent collection of the Modern Art Museum. But then again, she already hates that I became everything she wanted to be, not despite her destruction, but because of it. The bleach stains on the gallery floor are still there. Sarah Ming refused to remove them. She says they're part of history now. Tour groups stopped to see them. To hear the story of the night, jealousy turned to rage, rage turned to art, and art turned to triumph. And every time I walk past those stains, I remember the sound of bleach hitting canvas, the smell of chemicals eating paint, the sight of my grandmother's face disappearing. But mostly, I remember the 50,000 strangers who watched it happen and said, "This matters, she matters, art matters." That's worth more than any painting. Even mine.